So we've had a week or two to get used to playing the new map Stranded in Battlefield 2042. I'll be honest, I think it's gone down pretty interestingly across the player base. Some people have been thoroughly enjoying it, and I think it's definitely got some good qualities myself, but others have said that over time it's becoming less enjoyable the more they play. So I wanted to take the time today to break down the two main game modes in 2042, Conquest and Breakthrough, give my opinions on both modes on the new map, which I think play best, and ultimately what I think it was built for. Now, I'm going to try my best not to be biased, as most people know I prefer Breakthrough in 2042, but please hold me to account in the comment section if you think I am. So Conquest I've broken down into 3 key areas, and we can discuss each of those points in detail before moving on to Breakthrough. Firstly, I want us to talk about ground vehicles on Stranded. In terms of vehicular play, I think the map feels very linear in comparison to the open maps we've seen with the base game of 2042. The use of cover, debris and general trash around the map clearly shows the devs have tried to produce specific routes for ground vehicles to take. And by doing this, it definitely brings in the use of things like landmines, which previously haven't been very effective given the openness of maps allowing vehicles to travel around freely beforehand. But I can see this as being a negative for those vehicle players who have become used to the freedom they've experienced in 2042 so far, and trying to rein that back in when previously vehicles have gone basically unabated. I can obviously see why DICE have decided to do this, and I think it is a move to make the balance between ground vehicles and infantry much closer, but there is definitely still a disparity between how strong ground vehicles are and how effectively you can take them out as an infantry player. With that being said, as mainly an infantry guy myself, it does make it a bit easier to manage vehicles on the map because you generally know where they're going to be. So at least in my opinion, I think Conquest from that perspective plays a lot better than maybe some of the base maps anyway. For helicopter or jet fans, Stranded's gameplay loop might have had a slight negative effect on the gameplay experience for you. The main reason why I think this is the emphasis on fighting within the ship, and therefore the lack of targets taking to the open areas outside regularly. Although combat taking place on top of the ship and outside still isn't sparse by any stretch, especially in 128 player Conquest. One thing to mention though is the decision to allow the roof openings in the ship, which clearly were designed for heli pilots to drop into the base itself. To be honest though, up to this point I haven't seen a helicopter actually utilise this like we saw in the gameplay trailer, probably because they would be a sitting duck if they were to enter the ship like this. Given that fact, I think air vehicle players are probably going to struggle with Stranded in comparison to maybe again some of the other base maps, and again it all boils down to the fact that there's more cover for infantry players. With this in mind though, maybe it brings it more in line with previous Battlefield games and evens the playing field to an extent. I could probably speak most credibly on infantry play on Conquest because I'm mainly an infantry player myself, and the interior of the ship is a hotbed for this, and it's essentially the centerpiece to the whole map as we expected it to be. To be honest, it gives me a feeling of Metro, Aerodrome and Manifest mashed together, and it does work well when contesting the 2 flags inside the ship. But I think the care and attention put into this area doesn't really translate as well into the outside play spaces. The top of the ship doesn't feel as good as the Manifest ships to me, and also creates a haven for snipers to have oversight across the entirety of the map. Along either side of the ship and leading to the other capture points, the sight lines are still relatively long as well, meaning snipers really take a foothold here too. Let's be fair, crossing open ground is something we're used to now in 2042, and admittedly, even though Stranded is nowhere near as bad as some maps, it does still feel tough to play on if you aren't going into the ship. Thankfully, at this point the action is very much all centered within the bowels of the ship still, so moving out can be reserved for hopping in an LATV or a ram, for example. Flipping over the coin and looking at Breakthrough, immediately the choice to make the map infantry only is a positive one in my opinion. Personally, I've wanted a pure infantry only experience in 2042 for a while now. This is definitely a major step in the right direction for me. I also think that DICE have worked the flow of objectives around well too, with enough flanking routes to keep attackers in the game and the defenders guessing to an extent. Although I do feel like the attackers are looked on favourably in terms of how much room they have when advancing, and areas they're able to get into in comparison to the defending team. But I also don't think it's overbalanced towards the attacking team so much. However, this is obviously depending on how the defending team works together and plays the objective. Personally, I've had a lot of close games and also absolute blowouts already in this season, and for me that's what I want from a frontline Battlefield experience. I will say that even though I have had fun on Breakthrough, it has begun to have a couple of niggles with me. Especially now people are starting to unlock some of the new weapons and content which might not be too successfully balanced at this stage. The LVG. As it feels like it is becoming even more of a spam centre in B1, C1 than Exposure ever was. All in all, I know I spent more time discussing Conquest, but there are definitely more elements within the mode than Breakthrough, so I wanted to reflect that in my discussion. The pace and intensity of Breakthrough on Stranded is arguably the best in 2042 for me so far, especially since the removal of 128 Breakthrough earlier this year, RIP. If you're still missing the frenetic action, then Stranded is definitely a great place to get back into the game, I would say. But on the Conquest side, it really feels like more of the same, with a centralised indoor section instead of having 2 or 3, in the case of maps like Discarded, for example. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Stranded though, and which you prefer out of Conquest and Breakthrough. As always though, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for your time, and I'll catch you all in the next one.